All right, good morning. Let's get started. I hope that the first week of the winter term has been going well for you and that you have been enjoying the deceptively warm January weather. I can guarantee you that that is not going to last. So enjoy it while you can and welcome. I know we have a couple new faces for today. So raise your hand if you're here for the first time today. Okay. So on Monday, I asked everybody to introduce themselves, to share their name, how their winter break went. One thing that immediately comes to mind that's frightening or concerning about public speaking, and one thing that, in your opinion, makes somebody a good public speaker. So I know this is a little bit on the fly, but you're welcome to share what immediately comes to mind.
My name is Lofa. I'm from work in Samoa. My winter break was kind of ass. I was kind of sick. One thing that's frightening about public speaking is I get nervous when I'm in front of like a bunch of crowd. And I think one thing that makes someone a good public speaker is their confidence.
Yeah.
And how much they know what they're saying.
Great. Thank you. Welcome back. Glad to have you here. You've got the projection and enunciation down. That's great. So as you mentioned, right, a lot of the anxiety and apprehension about our confidence, our ability to get our ideas out correctly, those are things we'll be working on in this class, and the ability to fake it till you make it when it comes to confidence and speaking ability is something that we'll be developing skills in as well. So welcome. Glad to have you here. So last class, as a quick recap, we introduced ourselves. We talked about some of the ideas that came to mind about both what makes us anxious about public speaking, as well as the things that we look for in good public speeches. And we also had the chance to review the syllabus and some major policies for the course. As a reminder, there is a syllabus quiz that's due on Sunday that just goes over and reviews some of those ideas. So definitely give it another look and make sure that you've completed that quiz by Sunday. Only 5 questions, it's pretty easy. In addition to doing that, if you've not done so already, please complete the availability Google form that's on the front page of Canvas. This is where you're letting me know which days you anticipate not being able to come to class, maybe because you have an athletic competition or extracurricular scheduled for that day, or you know that you're going to be traveling and out of town. I've had a couple questions from folks who might have days, maybe you're traveling for like nationals or state competitions, but you're not sure if you qualify. If there is a day that you think that you have a chance of missing, go ahead and mark that as one of the absent days. That way we can slot you in for your speeches on the days that you're sure you'll be able to meet. So please complete that form. I definitely recommend looking at your schedule for other classes. Once next week starts, so next Monday, I will post the full speaking schedule for the term. So all of the days for all 4 of the speeches in the class that people are scheduled based on availability. And if you're not able to make those days, past that point, that would just be in cases of a documented emergency, like you get sick, like you're unable to safely come to class, etc. So please complete that by Sunday, and please get access of the Speechcraft textbook. I recommend having that by next week so that you can use that to help yourself as you're building out your outline and starting to work through the first speech. Before we get started, I like to take time every class to see if anybody has any questions about anything we talked about last class or anything in general about this course. Yes.
Just really quick on the syllabus quiz, I think it was like question 2 it asked, you know, it's like, oh, you're supposed to do a, not an outline, it was a draft for it. It was like true or false. And I put, oh, you know, true, because it's a draft, because just in my mind, rough draft equals an outline, and I got it wrong. I know it's really silly, it's just like a point of,
Sure.
you know, a syllabus really easy quiz. It was just like the wording, it's just a little confusing.
Okay. So, you know, the goal here is to say that you are never submitting a full speech to the class, right? So in this class, I'm not asking you to write a word for word speech that you're submitting. I'm asking you to turn in an outline. So I recognize that that's an important distinction, but that the phrasing on that quiz might be a little bit unclear. So I will rephrase that quiz for people who have not yet taken it, and for people who have and might have gotten that question incorrectly. I'll go ahead and fix that point for people who have already taken the quiz. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. Okay.
So I said, oh, you're saying, oh, they want a full draft? And I was like, no, outline. And then I said, yeah.
Okay. Again, thanks for pointing that out. If there are other issues like that that ever come up, let me know. Again, if you've already taken that and got that question wrong, I'll fix that and I'll rephrase that question for anybody else who has not taken the quiz. Great. All right. So to get started for today, I want to take some time to talk about this idea of the rhetorical situation. How many folks had the chance to give that Bitzer reading a look? It's not very many of you. That's okay. I do recommend that you give that reading a full look by the end of this week, because its ideas about the rhetorical situation, I think, are crucial to understanding public speaking and how to speak effectively. We'll be talking about some of the different types of appeals and ways that we make arguments and points in public speeches. And then I'll be spending some time talking a little bit about your first speech assignment for this class and giving you the chance to get to know and meet your partners. All right, so how many people are familiar with or who have heard of Robert F. Kennedy? Okay, so a number of you. Robert F. Kennedy was the brother of former President John F. Kennedy. As you know, JFK was assassinated and RFK was running for president. So RFK was considered to largely be the front runner for the Democratic nomination for US president, but was unfortunately killed over the course of his campaign, right? And the reason I bring RFK up is because RFK is very well known for a speech that he gave following the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And as a prominent figure in United States politics, as somebody that was being seen as a major leader at the time, right? He was put in a unique position where he was called upon to address and speak to that event. And I highlight this speech for a lot of reasons, not only in terms of the arguments and situation that it presents, but also the fact that this is what we largely consider to be an extemporaneous speech. One of the things that's really striking about this speech is that he gave it with very, very little time to prepare. He was in a van hearing that this has happened and was just jotting down some quick notes. Thankfully, you'll have a little bit more time than that for your speeches, but in a similar vein, he had some framework and a little bit of an outline, but the way that he delivered the speech naturally was drawing from his own experience and building off of that content to present material in a way that wasn't just reading off of something memorized, but was sharing a key idea that emerged from him over the course of understanding this event and the way to respond. So as you're watching, pay attention to the ways that he is making arguments, that he's addressing this situation. We'll use this to unpack the idea of the rhetorical situation in a bit more detail.
Follow those signs, please. I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and do justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are Black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, Black people amongst Blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are Black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and distrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. A favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another. Feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be Black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of Black people in this country want to live together want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. With dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
All right. So I'd like to hear from a couple volunteers with regard to what you might have noticed about this speech, both in regards to perhaps his delivery, his style, the content, the details. What were the things that really stood out to you? Yes, Mary.
How he delivered his speech was really something that stood out to me because when he started by saying by expressing how people feel and trying to say that he feels the same way, and then he provided solution to that and how they can overcome their feeling or what are the solution to deal with that. And I think that was very effective.
Yes, so really good point here. Addressing that immediate concern and feelings that people are dealing with in that moment. That's an important skill of public speaking. We'll be talking a little bit about the process of creating a need, creating a problem, and addressing that problem through communication. But I think the ability to resonate with the audience who's feeling this kind of raw emotion in that moment lends itself to credibility and is really this foot in the door toward the public. Other things that folks noticed. Over here.
Before he quoted the poem, he took a bigger pause than the whole poem the entire time. He told him get that word for word down so you can accurately Jesus, what's the word? Not decipher anything. What's the so he could say it, enunciate it better.
Yeah. So using deliberate pauses and also giving yourself a pause if you need to jog your memory or get back to an idea. Oftentimes, we're really interested in filling space as much as we can. And so being able to take a step back and recognize that I need a minute before I can get this supporting material in is okay, because it helps the speech overall.
The emotional content of this speech is just weighty, it's huge. And I like the fact that he addressed specifically the Black people for the most part, because that is where the heaviest of the emotional content would be, and the most concern for going forward with the country. But just the audience experience of the whole thing was genuine.
Yeah.
And it definitely came across as professional and genuine and directional as well.
Yeah, so, dealing with, again, the intensity of emotions at the time, and also the audience we're speaking to was primarily African American. So addressing a population that perhaps is feeling a lot of proximity to that issue and recognizing the carefulness of that, I think is important. Yeah.
Was he out of college, or was he just giving a speech somewhere?
So it wasn't actually at college, it was downtown.
Oh, the downtown.
Yeah. Any other things that stood out to folks? These are some really good observations about this speech. So Robert F. Kennedy's speech is something that's been analyzed a lot by public speakers, by people in rhetoric. It's a good example of the idea of the rhetorical situation. And I appreciate the way you all are starting to unpack some of the elements of this, right? There are a lot of different speeches that we'll be looking at in this class that come from people from a lot of different perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds. But I do like to start with this one because I think it very cleanly marks what Lloyd Bitzer talks about as the rhetorical situation, right? So according to Bitzer, the rhetorical situation has three parts: exigence, audience, and constraints, right? How many people have taken a class that has dealt with the idea of rhetoric or has defined rhetoric? How many people feel like they know what rhetoric is? Okay. Not very many people. That's okay. So the best way to define rhetoric is going all the way back to the Greeks. Rhetoric concerns itself with the available means of persuasion. right? The available means of persuasion. In other words, we hear the term rhetoric being used to describe like political rhetoric, like people are arguing, and it's oftentimes had a negative or pejorative interpretation. But rhetoric is about how we use persuasion to communicate and engage with one another. It's the idea that our words have meaning. You're sending an email, right? There's a goal to inform, to educate, to persuade. You're trying to do something through sending that email, right? You're using language to communicate with other people. In other words, public speaking is addressing a situation that requires and calls upon the use of language. So an exigence refers to an imperfection marked by urgency. It is an issue or topic that is coming up that is prompting or calling upon a person to speak and to address that concern. In this case, right, the imperfection marked by urgency is that Martin Luther King had just been killed. And Robert F. Kennedy was seen as a major political leader at the time, so he was put in a position where he was expected and called upon to address that issue, right? So in the same way, for this class, you'll be placed in situations where you're called upon to speak. And throughout our lives, right, we're placed in these exigencies. For instance, maybe we have a close friend who's getting married and we're being asked to be giving a wedding toast, or maybe someone close to us has passed away and we're asked to deliver a eulogy. We are put in situations that call upon us to speak. Secondarily, right, we have this issue of audience. So as a number of people, including Chris, pointed out, audience is important because thinking about who you're trying to adapt and address the speech toward is going to impact the arguments and points that you're making in the speech, right? You oftentimes might think about how you talk about things like your courses and your day with your grandma versus with your roommate. Those are going to look like very different conversations in terms of how you enunciate, but also in terms of context. You might filter out certain details about your life when sharing with your grandma. So audience is who you are addressing in your speech, right? So while there was an immediate audience in Memphis, there was a broader American public that was seeing this speech, right? It was being circulated through media, through news outlets, and so on. So audience matters in terms of thinking about who's taking in the speech, immediately responding to the speech, and meeting or not the goals that you have for that speech, right? A bad speech is typically one that's not able to adjust and account for the needs of the audience. If RFK started using slurs and negative statements to describe Black Americans, that would be incredibly inappropriate for that situation. And lastly, we have to think about constraints. So Bitzer defines constraints in two different categories. Those are known as artistic and inartistic proofs. Artistic proofs refer to things that are in the speaker's own control, right? For this class, you'll be giving speeches and you'll be drawing from your own style, the way that you talk, the ideas that you have, the energy that you give off, right? That's artistic proof. In this case, as folks pointed out, the use of poetry, right? Bringing in this quotation by Aeschylus to support a detail. Also, the fact that RFK came from a very unique background. His own brother had been killed, and so he was able to speak to some of the experiences of losing somebody close and influential in the moment, right? So he had a lot of specific details that he could draw from. For this speech, you can think about how your partner introduction might incorporate elements of personal detail, artistic proofs too. What did you learn about your partner over the course of getting to know them? We also have ideas that are outside of the speaker's control. In other words, there's a lot of things to consider here. First of all, there was very limited time. RFK had to get up and give this speech in 5 minutes with very little preparation. It was very off the cuff. Another really important consideration here is in the context of race, right? RFK was white and male, and his ability to speak as proximally to the experiences of people impacted by Dr. King's death from communities of color was not something that he possessed, right? So he was having to address and think carefully about how he could respond to the issues impacting a community that he was not a member of, right? So there are things that we don't notice about our speaking to. Some people mentioned they might be concerned that they've got something in their teeth or that they're speaking in a way that might frustrate somebody without knowing it. So there's these elements outside of our control that are impacting the speech and how it's addressed to, right? I think back to the 2020 vice presidential debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, right? And what do people talk about? Well, they don't talk about the content of that debate very much. They talk about the fact that a fly landed on Mike Pence's head. That wasn't really a thing in his control, right? That was something that genuinely distracted from the message and the content of that debate. So we would consider that to be an inartistic proof in that situation. So constraints here included things like RFK's background, race, and the recency of the event. In other words, we care about this because the rhetorical situation is what's inviting us to speak to and connect with each other. Public speaking, as we've talked about last class, is a collaboration, right? It's not just you're getting up and giving a speech to an audience who has nothing to give. The audience is giving too. They are listening. They're inviting you to be here. They're giving nonverbal feedback. They're listening. They're offering perhaps some advice and responses to the speech as it's happening. And I encourage you to provide that feedback as you are listening to people speak in this class. So we're placed in situations that invite us to connect. Commencement speeches are a great example, right? Commencement speakers are invited to college campuses. A variety of famous figures, celebrities, and so on might be called upon to speak. And at commencement speeches, it's not just that somebody goes in and just talks about their own experience. Those are oftentimes the worst commencement speeches. They do some research and they learn some of the details, perhaps statistics and information about the graduating class, about the community and area. And those are the speeches that tend to land better, the speeches that involve a connection between that speaker and the audience that they're addressing. So a lot of people mentioned whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, however you might like to describe it, that we're not always the biggest fans of getting up and speaking in front of people. I understand that. And what I want you to think about is that this is not a big public speaking audience. I want you to think about this kind of like a laboratory, right? Where we are working together, experimenting, playing, supporting each other, right? Sometimes you conduct an experiment and it blows up in your face, and that's okay, right? So our ability to practice, to work together, to collaborate is what I want you to think about when you think about this class. Not I'm getting up and speaking in front of a big group who's going to judge me afterwards. Because we're all learning, we're all growing, we all have things that we can do. Anxiety exists even in the best of speakers, right? So if you are like a famous public speaker who's getting ready to speak and address an audience, there's a good chance that you are feeling some type of jitter, anxiety, anticipation for that moment too. It never goes away. It's a question of how you're channeling and using that energy to better support you. Additionally, one idea that's important is that planning and preparation are the best way to handle speech anxiety, right? Giving a speech totally off the cuff with zero preparation is going to go a lot worse than taking the time to research your audience, to prepare an outline, to have some things that can be used to help you as you're getting up and giving that. Perhaps it doesn't go perfect, but you have something to return to no matter what. Anxiety is something that we don't often notice until it's pointed at. Oftentimes we give people the benefit of the doubt. One of the worst things that you can do is, as you're giving a speech, say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous," because that puts a big, target on your back to other people who now notice, "Wow, you are nervous. Huh, I didn't notice that before, but I do now," right? It's don't think of an elephant. What happens when you're asked not to think of an elephant? What do you think of an elephant? In the same way, anxiety is not something that audience members will typically notice unless that's something that you make a big deal out of. So hide it. You might think about, if you're involved in theater or stage production, the idea the show must go on. And sometimes there are hiccups, things that happen that shouldn't in a show. And oftentimes people don't notice them because they're covered up or they're even treated as if they're a part of the production, right? Think about it that way. As mentioned, we're all learning together, right? We're all growing. We have 4 speeches in this class. If the first speech or two isn't perfect, that's okay, because we're building on those skills over time. So as I've mentioned, I've been involved with coaching speech and debate. And one of my favorite community activities to do is vocal warm-ups. So before we go out to a tournament, all the coaches, all the students, we get together in a big circle. And we do a whole bunch of silly tongue twisters and warm-ups to get us pumped up for the day. And one of the things I love about that is the oral history of it. So sometimes we have people on our team, coaches and students who brought in specific warm-ups. And then we pass those warm-ups down and have new people who brought in new warm-ups and tongue twisters into the mix. So some people that I worked with at my old institution at the University of Utah, they sometimes like to send me videos of the old warm-ups that I did with them, and it warms my heart. I'll tell you that I love to do warm-ups in the car on the way to work. So one of my favorites is to sit in solemn silence on a dull, dark dock in a pestilential prison with a lifelong lock, awaiting the sensation of a short, sharp shock from a cheap and chippy chopper on a big blackboard, right? It's a great way to practice getting some enunciation down, warming up your mouth, training those muscles. Perhaps it's singing along to a silly song. Maybe you have a favorite song that you like to listen to, right? I like to listen to like 2000s pop punk in the car, right? So I'm blasting Paramore on the way to work. It's a lot of fun. So warm-ups are a great way to prepare and to help you to just kind of deal with some of those hiccups that happen. Because we make verbal gaffes, we don't always speak the way we intend to all the time. That's okay, but warm-ups can help to address that. And anxiety is also excitement, right? We're sometimes excited and looking forward to this speech, and we're thinking about that nervous energy and butterflies in our stomach as we prepare to do that. So when we think about delivery, right, we might think about how people use a variety of different settings and contexts to give a speech, right? So for example, former presidential candidate and Senator Mitt Romney is an example of a public figure who uses things like town halls, which are settings in which a public is addressed and spoken to in a more civic mode, right? A conversational model is the idea that a speaker and their audience are in a dialogue, that it's not necessarily just this one-way street, it's that you're giving a speech, perhaps you're responding to feedback from other people, perhaps you're moving around to address specific audiences, right? It's this idea that a speech is a conversation that you're invited to participate in. Whereas a civic model sees the idea of speaking as part of a broader engagement. Something like a town hall is an example of how the use of speech is designed to achieve a goal, perhaps to make a politician aware about things that they need to do or say differently. Perhaps the role of debate to try to get at an issue or topic from different perspectives. This goes back to the Greeks and the idea that dialectic, the use of dialogue to communicate, has the ultimate goal of trying to uncover and figure out the truth. That we use dialogue to better understand each other and unpack a variety of different issues. So one of the concerns here about public speaking, and again, this dates all the way back to the Greeks, who we trace as really the people who initiated how we come to understand public speaking, is this concern as to whether or not public speaking is really an art or a skill that we can build, or if it's just a knack, right? Or a trick that we can learn. And this matters for us as we're thinking about ethics, if we're thinking about being an effective public speaker, because it gets at what being a good public speaker is, what it means, and why it matters. One way of thinking about this is to think about a used car salesperson, right? We have this stereotype of somebody who's trying to sell a used car who might be doing everything that they can to try to get us to buy a car. Maybe it's a total lemon, maybe it's going to break down within 5 miles, but it is their job to do their darndest to try to sell you that car, to make an argument, and to try to get you to buy that car, right? How many people have watched Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, right? So if you're familiar, right, with Saul Goodman, right, his character played by Bob Odenkirk is very much that type of person who will say and do whatever it takes in order to get the sale, to get the verdict, right, to get what people want. And we're oftentimes very concerned about that type of person who is not necessarily telling us the truth, but is a snake oil salesman who's trying to get us to do something. So in this way, right, the Greeks were concerned that public speaking was not truly an art because it, quote, made the weaker argument the stronger. There might be 2 cars, one's way better than the other, but this person's going to get you to buy the junk car, right? So if the goal of speaking and addressing an audience is to uncover the truth, what about speaking that's designed to be deceptive, right? Over the years, we've had a lot of conversations about the validity of information that we receive, right? The credibility of sources, the reliability of information that we're exposed to. And this has been an issue that's been plaguing us for a long time. In fact, there have been a lot of leaders who have taken articles from The Onion, which is a satirical news site, and interpret them to be the real news. So public speaking's history is a challenging one for us to think about, right? Because our goal is not to try to get people to do what we want, regardless of the ethics or truth. We have to negotiate the truth and honesty and ethics of our communication with the power that we have on ourselves as we're speaking. So public speaking, right? The history and analysis of public speaking going back to the Greeks, well, the study of public speaking at this time was generally focused on white land-owning men. And that was the kind of history and context because those were individuals who had the power and authority in things like legal proceedings, in public forums, and so on, right? Not to say that women did not have opportunities to speak, just that the study and practice of rhetoric as an area of study, as an art, has primarily centered on this kind of trope. So over the decades and centuries since, we've been pushing back against that and understanding that public speaking means a lot of different things to different people. That being a good public speaker for somebody with a disability, for a person of color, for the experiences of women, right? That is a very different model and way of thinking about public speaking that might go against what traditionally has been considered to be a good public speech. So in this way, we have to be thinking about the idea that what makes good public speaking and good public speakers is incredibly varied. And we have to consider how somebody's unique background and experience is enhancing the quality of their speech and experience. How many people have heard of these three things before? Ethos, pathos, logos. Okay, so a lot of you. So if you haven't, I'll do a quick refresher here. These are important things for us to consider as we're looking at a speech, right? So first, we have ethos, which is an appeal to credibility. Second, pathos, an appeal to emotion. And third, logos, an appeal to logic. Again, this goes back to the Greeks, and this goes back to some of the fundamental ways that we have building blocks for speeches. We noticed this in RFK's speech. So ethos is referring to the credibility and experience that an author has and is able to bring to the table, right? So if somebody is giving a speech, well, the foot in the door is their ability to show that they know their stuff. RFK did this by talking about his own experience of losing his own brother, of understanding the gravity and severity of MLK's death and its impact on the community. Why would we listen to you if we didn't feel like you knew a thing or two, right? In this class, we'll be listening to you introduce your partner, knowing that you've taken some time and work to share a little bit about them. And you can use rich details about your partner's experience and life as a way of showing that you know your stuff. One way of easily thinking about this is to think about a doctor's badge, right? If you see somebody who has that badge or has a doctor in their title, you might be more likely to give them credibility, right? Or not, depending on your experience with US healthcare system. I've studied choral for years. Drawing upon your own experience doing a thing is an appeal to ethos. Pathos, right? So one of my favorite examples of this is there's actually a Pokemon that came out a couple of years ago, and the Pokemon was designed to represent dying coral, right? So they're sad, they kind of look, not in a great state. And that's the use of pathos. It's identifying an issue that coral reefs are dying out throughout the world and kind of giving it an interesting take, right? So this is using pathos, emotional appeals to make an argument. Pathos, another way of thinking about this is if you've ever flipped channels and you've seen those like really sad advertisements for adopting a pet, they oftentimes play sad music, they're in black and white, you see these poor dogs that are trapped in these cages. Well, the goal is to try to get you to adopt. Knowing how sad that experience is, right? So pathos can appeal to that emotion. It can also appeal to anger, frustration. It can appeal to things like happiness. We noticed this in RFK as he was talking about his own experiences, his frustration, the anger the audiences felt in the moment, and being able to speak to that was, as people mentioned, a powerful tool to feel like they could resonate with him. And lastly, we have the idea of logos, right? The use of logic. So according to the Greeks, in an ideal world, there would be no use of emotion or credibility. It would all be about logic, right? And that's not the world we live in. That's okay. How many people have ever seen any of the Star Trek movies or TV shows? Okay, so a few of you might be familiar, right, with the character Spock, or the species known as the Vulcan, right? They are a species that says we do not use emotions, we suppress emotions, and we use logic to communicate, right? In an ideal world, the Greeks said you should have logos. So logos is about how we make arguments connect with one another in a logical fashion, right? So you might be familiar with the syllogism. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal, right? So the use of logos is important here too. Perhaps we're making an argument about why our partner's experiences in life are really relatable. Like many of you, my partner Danny had no idea what he wanted to major in, but really became a big fan of English, right? So trying to use a relatable experience through a logical appeal is a strategy that you might use in your speech, right? So we'll be talking about these three a lot in this class. And what I encourage you to do is be thinking about how you can use some of these appeals to create the building blocks of your speech. So miscommunication happens, right? We'll be talking more about audience, about feedback, about our ability to respond to issues. But if you think about the game telephone, where you go around and you whisper something to somebody else and you see where it ends at the end, oftentimes things get lost in translation. Oftentimes the ending message is really silly than the starting message, right? Nobody is going to remember or memorize the content of your speech ever, right? There is going to be so much that they just don't stick with them after the fact. But what they do remember is how things made them feel, and they might remember some of the key details that you flagged for them, right? So if you're worried about anxiety, I think one way to help about this is to remember that your speech is not going to be put, on the table to totally diagnose and pick apart by everybody. That the key ideas and moments are the ones that really stand out to people. It's more about learning about you and the content of the speech, introducing yourself and your partner and understanding both of you a little bit better. So with that in mind, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the first speech in this class. Again, we have 4 speeches total that all of us will be doing. The first one is the partner introduction speech. So next Monday, after everybody has had the chance to work on that form, I will be posting which of those 3 days people will be scheduled to speak, right? So we'll have a cluster of people present on Friday, January 20th. So that is a week from this Friday. We'll have some people present on the 23rd and people present on the 25th. And I'll shuffle things around so that if you speak early this time around, maybe you're speaking later for the next speech. So look forward to that. So this partner introduction speech is an opportunity to give a very short, very low stakes speech that's a chance for us to dip our toes into public speaking and all get to know each other better. Okay? In fact, this speech is only 3 to 4 minutes long, which might seem kind of long, but once you get out to speak and once you practice, that time just flies by. So in just a minute, I'll be sharing the partners assigned for this speech. And I'll be asking you to take some time to get to know and understand your partner a little bit better. So you might be taking some time during class. You'll have time both today and on Friday to do that. But I also encourage you to take some time perhaps to message and get in contact with them outside of class so that you can better understand one another. And as you're getting to know your partner, the really big thing I want you to focus on are some of the unique details and things that might really help us to learn a little bit more. Maybe their hobbies, their interests, memorable stories or experiences in their lives, and so on. And as part of this, you'll be developing an outline that you'll be printing out to give to me prior to your speech, and that you can also use for yourself as you're giving the speech. I'll be talking a little bit more about outlines and the rubric for this assignment on Friday, but I have already included a sample outline so that you can see what that part of the assignment is generally looking like. All right. So some logistics here. Your speech day is going to be on Monday. You're posted on Monday. So using that availability form, I'll slot people to one of those 3 days. You should be physically printing 2 copies of the outline of the speech. One of the copies you will give to me before you give the speech so that I can look at it as you're working and giving the speech. And then 1 copy is one that you can use for yourself. So I encourage you to use the EOU library to print it out at least a day in advance. Perhaps you have a printer available at home. If you're having issues with finding a way to print, please let me know. On the day that you are scheduled to speak, I'll be using the whiteboard over here, and I'll have a list. Maybe the list is 1 to 7. So basically, if you're scheduled to speak on the day, you'll write your name on the whiteboard and we'll go down that speaking order, starting at the beginning of the time, right? So if you are scheduled to speak first, we'll just keep going down the line. So I encourage you to maybe come in early or come in as soon as you're able so that you can write your name in, right? So maybe you come in and you see this list over here, and you're like, wow, I'm here, I'm ready to go. I am going to be number 4, right? And then people will start to come in, and then we'll have that listing. That's what that will look like in terms of what the speaking order on the specific day is. And then the speech is a maximum of 4 minutes. I'll be giving you time signals as you go down so that you know what to expect as you're pacing yourself through that speech too. Again, 4 minutes goes by really fast. All right. So these are the partnerships. I'm going to go down the list, and when we get to your partnership, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. I will shuffle the partnerships for people whose partner is not here today. So Noah and Kenzie, raise your hands. Looks like you two are here. Tucker and Natalie. Okay. Ferris and Lily. Cade and Austin. Alofa and James. It's like James is not here, so Alofa will if we can get you with anybody else. Audrey and Annika. Okay. Nathania and Chris. Mary and Lizzie. Olivia and Skylar. Michaela and Jessica. So remind me, Michaela or Jessica?
Yes.
Jessica, okay. 50-50 and I got it wrong. All right. CJ and Kelly. Devin and Chad. Behind you. And Ella and Alexander. Okay. So it looks like the 2 people who were not here will rearrange. So Alofa and Jessica will have you 2 become a partnership for this. Okay. What I'd like you to do is to take a quick minute to move over and say hi to your partner. I recommend maybe exchanging some basic contact information and starting to ask questions. We'll have more time to get to know them on Friday. Give you another minute. Recommend exchanging some basic info. If you haven't done so already. Go ahead and wrap up your conversation. All right. So you will have a lot more time on Friday to talk to your partner more, and you'll be able to have time to begin developing some details for an outline on Friday. So look forward to that. To wrap up for today, I want you to start thinking a little bit about this partner speech. What are some things you started to notice in this preliminary conversation? How might you use these ideas, ethos, pathos, logos, and rhetorical situation to share a little bit about this partner? So we talked about the rhetorical situation and some of the different appeals, structure of public speaking, a lot of these building blocks as to what public speaking is and how we do it. And on Friday, we're going to be looking more at how we do research, how we create the content and outline of that speech. And we'll also be going over the rubric and greater details to the assignment so that you feel prepared and ready to go as we get into all of that good stuff next. So I hope you have a great rest of your morning, rest of your day. I'll see you again on Friday.